Welcome
Let's
back,
do it.
everybody. I'm Jim Budd, former senior patrol agent with the United States Border Patrol. And today I have with me again one of my most favorite people, Andrew Free, a former attorney, immigration attorney, so he knows the insides of that. You've also been an instructor, too, a professor, right, of law? Did you teach law?
I did. I taught for a year at the University of Washington Law School.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Well, I sent Andrew a text and I was wondering if he would be interested in talking about this concept and the subject of state violence because I will say I would say I would never been right wing. I was raised a Democrat from my parents, but also raised in the South in Alabama in the 70s and 80s. So it is what it is. And I would say probably more middle of the road. And then obviously believing in American exceptionalism, joining the Border Patrol and things like that. I would say when I would think about this concept of state violence, I can look at other countries and I can see it in other countries. And yet I recognize now that for most of my life, I'm like 53, most of my life, I was unwilling to look at my own country in that way and recognize state violence. Most certainly, I don't think I recognized how administrative policies and so forth can bring about state violence. And I think so I've been thinking about this subject for a while, trying to think on it and understand where that resistance comes from. But I see that I think most Americans that don't have training in this area um, are probably kind of like me in that they don't recognize state violence in the United States. And I think everybody's starting to kind of think about this with the shooting of the CEO and the concept that no, state violence can look like many different things. And the realization that I think that probably every American has suffered this violence from, you know, health insurance companies and are starting to go, wait a minute, this is systemic. And now I see how this affects, and it is violence, you know? And so I think Americans, this is an opportune time to kind of look at it and look why we have these prejudices, why we have such a difficult time of seeing it within our own government and saying that out loud. And what is your opinion, Andrew, of what most Americans think state violence is? Certainly as a lawyer and as an educator.
Well, I think for many of us, myself included, it is largely hidden in plain sight and unacknowledged until it needs to be strategically acknowledged, and the deployment of violence is necessary to maintain or reproduce it. I think whether it's the U.S. military industrial complex and our place in the world, or whether it's the border industry and the policing of the, and the manufacturing of the border, which is a thing that even today, if you go some places where it exists, you can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like magic. You conjure it up. It's like, oh, okay, here is this thing we call a border that makes this thing we call a state. Supposedly. And then in domestically, like it's policing in prisons, cops, courts, cages, the family policing system. And so if people have been, kind of talking about the the violent arms of the state. Um, but for years, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
since it's been around, particularly
Yeah.
those who are daily on a daily basis subjected to it and have to
Mm-hmm.
find a way to navigate it. And one of the real luxuries of having the uninherited or like unearned privileges of like whiteness and being in certain class positions, being certain like having language privilege, having is it, we're not forced every day to confront it and to
Mm-hmm.
like negotiate in our own value systems and our own belief systems the reality that a lot of people who are responsible for maintaining this condition that we live in believe that it's necessary in order for us to all survive. And
Mm-hmm.
you think about the option set that the new administration and every administration previous has, it is an option to simply legalize everybody in the United States who doesn't have status. That's an option.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In the very same way as it's an option to remove everybody, you know, theoretically. And so we're just choosing the most violent option
Mm-hmm.
because we think that this is the conceit, I think, of like Lone Star and all this other stuff is like, oh, you have to do this militarily. You have to do this in a police response. You have to do this by, yeah, by using state violence, or else the state will cease to be as we want it to be.
I, I I can totally see that, especially in immigration in my life, because as a young agent, I was repeating what I had been taught in the Border Patrol, and not being from the southern border, or and being white and not having any ties to the southern border. It was like, okay, that makes sense. There's a legal way to do it. Anybody can go do it, and these people are choosing not to. And and quite honestly, when they started building the fence in Campo and it started coming across, at first it made sense, because I can't tell you how many times the sensor would go off and people would just drive just big old Oldsmobiles full of drugs right through the border. And it was like, okay, this makes sense. But that's also not being educated on why people are fleeing. And it's also conflating the difference between, it's conflating two different groups: drug smugglers and people who are seeking either work or safety, which I think is what we have done really good, really well, what we have done really well in this country. And my Alabama girl came out. And I think that's what the propaganda has been doing very well in this country. Certainly started before 9/11, but really got ramped up after 9/11. And I don't think most Americans understand that the asylum system, well, number one, they don't understand that it's essential to national security. And number two, they don't understand that we don't actually have much of an asylum system. Like, they didn't tell us as young agents that no, there really aren't that many opportunities for people to come in legally. And we're making it smaller and smaller every year, kind of thing. And then the demographics change in the Obama administration, and as far as the majority of people coming to our southern border looking to come in legally are asylum seekers versus people looking for work or whatever. And not that it should be acceptable to pass policies that send people to their deaths, knowingly send people to their deaths, whether they're looking for work or asylum. But I mean, for God's sakes, asylum is a human right under our own laws. And it's what I was taught as a Border Patrol agent. And our response, most certainly, when the demographics change of who's coming across, change to asylum seekers, the government did not stop and think, okay, this is a different demographic. This is a demographic that's coming across trying to exercise their rights. They just were like, we don't want them to be seen as seeking a right. We want to criminalize them. And so we criminalize them and treat them the same as everybody else. And now we don't just have big burly men looking for jobs, or big burly men that are drug smuggling, dying out there in the deserts, or, freezing to death in the mountains I used to work. Now we have children. Now we have families, entire families. We have grandmothers and grandfathers and this and that. And the government starts to hide it. And I think today I was walking and I thought, the only difference between to keep these people safe is, number one, stop criminalizing them, and two, I don't know, open up a couple more lanes and process more people. And it just seems like that, and yet the government's telling us that this is a national security emergency, threat, national emergency, on and on and on and on. But they created all of this. They
Yeah.
created all this. And I just can't help but think, like, because everybody knows if you meter or shut down the asylum system, you're going to have people overwhelming the Border Patrol in between the ports of entry. And yet they keep doing it. And so I see all this as political movement to further criminalize them, further shut down the asylum system. And this is going to lead to more violent. So the policies themselves don't sound bad. They don't sound violent, but they are. And can you explain to average Americans who don't live on the southern border how that it is so violent?
I don't know if I can. I think you could probably do it better. I'll give it a shot. I'll give um, you know, the option that I just laid out of just legalizing everybody was one that none other than famous liberal Ronald Reagan, um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, in 1986, with a coalition that included Tip O'Neill and labor union. It was very contentious, and it didn't do everything, and it increased penalties for some things, and it altered but it was essentially it was a bargain that we want to keep people here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then in 1994, under Bill Clinton, um, we have the birth of the deterrence policy as official U.S. State-making border enforcement policy, which basically says um, that we want to impose enough harm or enough deterrence that people who are thinking about migrating to the US irregularly don't even think about doing it. And that if you do migrate to the US irregularly through a channel that we haven't elected for you ahead of time and made available to you because we chose it, then you will suffer such harsh penalties that that will deter other people, even if it hasn't deterred you. So that's deterrence. And we're not unique in this. We're not exceptional in this. This is the current consensus of like the the global Western Italy is like, I was reading the other day, more than 10,000 people have died in the Mediterranean simply trying to get from North Africa to various points in Southern Europe. And similarly, you have, the world's busiest land crossing, the US Mexico border has this uh, it's littered with bodies. This phenomenon of all these sensors and personnel and air, marine, um, the aerostat, and then humans watching it. And as closely as we watch, people die. And the answer to why that is, the answer to why are human beings dying in the desert, or they're dying they're drowning in the river, or they're dying at the port of entry after apprehension, is because we have built into our policy a premise that we will kill you. We will kill you if you break this law. And we will do so without any form of judicial death sentence or due process or anything like that. And then we will say it's because you broke the law. And we didn't do it. You and I have talked about the statistics on border patrol deaths that I, got through FOIA and comparing them to other statistics. And, they call them wall falls. That's what Border Patrol calls the deaths of people who've climbed, scaled the 30-foot, they get up and
Mm-hmm.
they call those deaths wall falls. Well,
Mm-hmm.
did the fall, is that what, that may have been the thing that immediately led to the injury that ended the person's life, but that doesn't happen if there's not a wall there. And the fact that we say we're going to put all these like deterrence mechanisms in place is all premised on the idea that there's nothing that we can't do, up to and including in ending your life, that would be outside of the bounds of policy. And that's been a bipartisan commitment for the last 30 years, at least, right? In the
Yeah.
hardening of, at least the southern US border, but also in the Caribbean, we're interdicting Haitians, interdicting Cubans, and, in ways that ended a lot of lives. So it's just built in. And the fact that we don't consider it to be violent really says more about us as people who aren't in the center of it, and what does it take for us to allow this system to perpetuate under our noses. It, at this point, I think everybody kind of knows. This is the part,
You would
20.
think that everybody knows, but I've got some neighbors who've discovered who I am that are all white males who are in a fury that I'm suggesting that we're killing people out there in the desert.
It's weird because I suspect that those white males might have a similarly skeptical view of federal law enforcement if they were asked about the day that we're recording this, January 6th, 4 years ago.
Mm,
They
mm-hmm,
probably would take as a given less of what the government says about that particular,
mm-hmm,
encounter. So there's this weird phenomena where like you have people who distrust the deep state and they
mm-hmm,
distrust institutions of state power and they distrust overreach from government. And they
mm-hmm,
certainly don't want the federal government or any state government really, kind of telling you how to live your life,
mm-hmm.
except for this boot. This boot, like um, it's so important that we have it. And I'm, my philosophy at this point in this particular moment is I'm just learning. I can't. I don't. I obviously don't know what I thought I knew. I thought that if people saw what I saw, and what you saw, everybody else saw, that we would act differently. That we would, right. And I also thought that when I
Mm-hmm.
was taught, like as a child, that certain things are right and certain things are wrong, and that
Yeah,
we should try and like value life, preserve it to the extent we can,
yeah.
particularly the lives of children, that um, or that we should keep families together. Like I thought that those things were shared by more of my fellow humans than I've learned that they are. Um,
Well, I
and
mean, obviously, I wouldn't have come out and written a book about my sexual assault in the Border Patrol if I didn't think it was going to do any valid good. And my hope was that they would address that for the women of the Border Patrol and then start to say, well, what about all these guys that are getting arrested for rape and pedophilia that are agents that, for citizens? What are they doing to the migrants and stuff? And I know what they do to the migrants. And so I had hoped but what I saw the other day with a judge in Tucson just letting a Border Patrol agent go after he pled guilty to sexually assaulting his two daughters for years. He was a BORTAC agent, and I'll talk about that probably in another podcast. And I just don't know what to do when you sit there and watch a judge use legal terminology to excuse why he's going to let this man who is going to go out. He literally said, Andrew, he literally says, I'm paraphrasing. He says, I thought about if I put you in jail for 3 years, but if I put you in jail for 3 years, then there's not going to be any restitution. Only one of the victims got restitution, $3,000. So you can rape your daughters for 11 years for $3,000. That's what, if you're a Border Patrol agent. And you won't be able to get any kind of therapy, any kind of help for your proclivity. And like I said, I'm paraphrasing. But I think if we put you in lifelong probation and don't make you register as a sex offender, then we can keep track of you and make sure that you're not doing this again. I'm like, this is a judge, Andrew. This is a man with 2 more years education than I have. He has studied the law his whole life. I know he studied law at University of Arizona. He's obviously been an attorney for long enough that felt he could run for judge, and the community over there elected him as judge. He's supposed to be, and I'm just like, I, I'm like you. I just don't know where to go. I do not know where to go with this. And what scares me is if this is the way judges are thinking, then what are just average everyday Americans thinking that don't know anything about the law? And no wonder they think it's okay for Border Patrol agents to dish out punishment in the field to teach people a lesson, which is contradictory to our entire legal system and everything the Constitution is supposed to stand for, and yada, yada, yada. And I just think, like, when I look back to when I was an agent, it felt like the policies that we were enforcing, they're like, it's their decision. They come out here and this and that. The policy is what it is. They could go do it legally. And you start to understand, no, they can't. And it's just an excuse that we use. But then when I fast forward to today, 20, 25 years later, it feels like we've got these murder buoys out with saw blades in between them. We have seen videos of children being lacerated by razor wire, and everybody's just going, yes, so. And I used to think that if we showed them the bodies out there in the desert, then maybe people would be shamed into it and say, oh, we have to do something about this and stuff. But this right here, what we've gone through in the last decade has shown me, they think they deserve that. And so that scares me. And I don't even know where to go.
Well, I mean, the lucky part is you don't have anywhere to go, so we're stuck here and we get to figure it out, like we it's I, at some level, um I too thought uh that informing people, that documenting things in a way that's rigorous and reliable, and then identifying the standards or rules or you know um, the duty that's been breached because of what we've documented, and then presenting that with the right voice to the right person at the right time in the right way can be a fulcrum for change. And it
Mm-hmm.
was in many instances, whether at an individual level, if you pick the right, vehicle, and then at a scale, um, once again, if you understand like what law does and does not do, a lot of the worst things that have ever happened have happened with the full support of the law. The things that, I'm writing a piece
Slavery.
about. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, come on, like we can all,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so interesting that you say that because as a person who grew up in the South, also, raised by folks who were not reactionaries and not, virulent racists, and like we didn't have a red flag. Growing up in Georgia, I absorbed my context. Obviously, Newt Gingrich was my congressman, so, but,
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, that was always the example, that and the Holocaust that I grew up with, being taught
Yep.
these are the worst things humans do to each other. And there's really good reasons, and institutions and entire systems and constitutional amendments and international organizations and all these negotiated preventive measures that are meant to keep us as humans from repeating the past. And uh, we are old enough, both you and I, to like have memory of stuff that has transgressed these values. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not at scale, but certainly pretty close. I mean, we're at this point, we're at 1.9 million legally enslavable people in the United States. I'm not saying that they are all enslaved, but they are legally enslavable because they are locked in a carceral setting. And that's one of my big sort of like things I've been re-educated on as a person who like sued a bunch of ICE prisons for forced labor, and you know helped a team that got a jury to award $23 million to formerly incarcerated workers, $17 million to formerly incarcerated immigrants, for not paying the minimum
Mm-hmm.
wage. I started that. Um, I started my engagement in that from the premise that, oh, slavery is bad. People, if you got them up to the line and you said, well, if what you're doing is slavery, then people would say, oh, well, I'm not doing that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and then I just came to the realization I've been taught by my fellow humans and the systems that we have created, that actually no, the entire state of California is like a majority slave state if you've been convicted of a crime, if you're being punished. And to the extent we thought that the judiciary is some enlightened, exception to that, no, the California Supreme Court also said that even if you have not been convicted of a crime, if you've just been arrested on the word of a cop, that you can be legally, you can be put to labor in a jail during pretrial
Mm-hmm.
detention without
Mm-hmm.
being convicted. And okay, so that for me breaks the history that we've been
Yeah.
given. Similarly, like the idea of international law being a thing I have a very close friend from law school who's an international law scholar, and she sent me a meme over Christmas. It's like, somebody asking Santa if international law is real. It's like, sure, kid. And on the asylum, the state violence at the border, and in the immigration system, um, the West has collectively decided that it is not, that asylum is not real, and that there will be no consequences for a wholesale abdication of our responsibility to protect and violation of the freedom of movement. And, for most colonized people, most people at the other end of empire, that's always been the case. But now the boomerang has come back. So, like,
Hmm. Hmm.
like it's here. We're doing the things that we've done elsewhere. Same thing in Europe. And you say like you're creating the problem that then is having the consequences. Yeah, a lot of people say, immigrants say, we're here because you're there. You stop coming
Right.
and messing with our towns and spoliating our water, right? Or like making our crops fail. That a lot of folks that I represented, they were suffering from the fact that companies were coming in and diverting water resources, and that messed up the crops. And this is a society that kind of lives on crops, and so there's nowhere else to go. And then transnational criminal organizations come in and start extracting what's left. And so a lot of that has to do with our choices. And again, I'm just learning, like, this is the reality we live in right now. It doesn't mean I don't have hope, or I think there's nothing to be done, or I think that there's not like a point in doing the work that you do or the work that I do. It just means I'm like much more attuned to the reality of what we're living through, as opposed to what I was taught it is, or ideologically wanted it to be, or what I'd hoped. you know. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think um,
It's so hard right now because it's just like, I mean, even like I try to get people to understand, when I realize that they don't give a shit about migrants, people dying, families dying out there. And how, if you don't give a shit about migrants, let's talk about Border Patrol agents. Let's talk about the suicide attempts. Let's talk about me. I threw all that out there too. And it's like to watch the Border Patrol turn around and use our suicides as agents for constantly finding dead children and women and everybody and all this other stuff, to then get pity and blame it on Joe Biden as if this is suddenly a new phenomenon with us doing this. And then they turn around and they take a picture of themselves counseling another agent and put it out there. I can't even, maybe USA Today or something. They're saying we're going to have to hire more chaplains because there's going to be so much death and our Border Patrol agents are suffering. And I'm just like, oh, fuck me. Jesus Christ. Just
it
like,
reminds me of this. I went to this really wonderful conference in Austin that was put on by the Prison and Jail Innovation Lab at UT Austin.
mm-hmm,
Um, and it was not a usual conference for me because I was surrounded by state officials and federal officials who work in the
mm-hmm,
prison jail system. And we were talking about deaths in custody, right? And so it was
uh-huh.
journalists, it was academics, it was lawyers, and then it was also wardens and administrators, carceral administrators. And one of the things that really struck me was the amount of harm that being around the conditions that create death in custody does to not just the people who work inside, but also the communities that are
Oh,
around.
yeah.
It
Oh,
has a ripple
yeah.
effect every day. And that's obvious. We're interconnected. The lies that we tell ourselves about why you can do this bad thing to that bad person, like they fall apart as soon as you see the consequences of doing the bad thing. And that's what, I think this moral injury that people suffer from being involved in a system that would, kill children and blame it on their parents, or that would, saw a person in the middle of the river. Like I can't, it's inconceivable to me
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
that we can live in a world that has literally created a moat. Like, but it is, yeah, it has to be conceivable because I
Yes.
actually live in that world. I'm not in a simulation, I don't think. And this is not, you and I seem to have, I'm not an NPC, you're not an NPC. So this is real, right? Uh,
Uh-huh.
and it's just the world we live in. And
Yeah.
to the extent that I thought it wasn't, or to the extent that I thought that there were people who would rise up and say no to things that I've seen, um, I was just wrong. And it's okay,
People ask me when that's going to happen, and I often say I think I think most people have to suffer. I think we have not fallen hard enough. Um, and I don't just blame the first Trump administration. This has been going on it had nothing to do with Trump for quite some time. Um, I personally think it goes back to these atrocities that we commit basically because we're capitalist and want stuff, and we just
Yep.
justify that in whatever way, and we refuse to talk about it. I'm a good example of what happens when you don't talk about, the things you've done in your life and the trauma that it causes. And I don't know that I don't think I'll see us getting out of this in my lifetime. But I mean, when I'm looking at what I used to think were just administrative policies like deterrence, metering at ports, and then it keeps progressing the bans for crossing between the ports, and then it just gets to where you start to see how much these administrative policies cause violence to everybody around. And I think you're so right when you sit there and say that they've just convinced us that this is the way it has to be.
Sure.
I mean, quite literally, because that's the only argument I get back from everybody is like, well, what else are we going to do? And I'm like, well, there's a lot of things we could do.
Yeah, no, we could do what we were doing. It's not without historical precedent. Like you basically have to believe the United States didn't exist before 1924
Mm-hmm.
in order to believe that what we need now is these hardened borders. Because I
Mm-hmm.
hear people say, like, without a border and the violence that its maintenance implies, like, you know, that we wouldn't be a nation.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the premise, right? Like you have to kill people, you
Mm-hmm.
have to chop them up in razor wires, you have to burn them in the desert, you have to, impale them with the wall, you have to run them over, um, beat them up, kill them, because otherwise the United States is going to cease to exist.
Yeah.
Or like there's the even more virulently racist one is like replacement theory and all this other stuff. But the reality of it that we're living through is that the window of possibilities in our imaginations gets closed with repression and with like just social apathy and with the material needs that all of us experience in capitalism, particularly this
Mm-hmm.
stage of it. Like most of my neighbors and the people that I would organize with and care about, like most people have like they're just a couple of days away or a couple of disasters away from being just in absolutely acute need.
Right.
So we don't have time to like sit around and think about other people's stuff or what the world could be, or people are trying to survive. And
Mm-hmm.
I used to the resent the hell out of like people who were like, well, I can't do anything about it. It's not really my problem, you
Yeah.
know? Like it's being done in my name. I don't like that, but look at our system. How do I impact anything? And
Mm-hmm.
so I would send those people a mutual aid request or like a GoFundMe. It's like, okay, well, this is the thing you can do. This person needs
Mm-hmm.
$300 to get on a plane to reunite with their
Mm-hmm.
kids. So let's, but I actually think the survival of people who know that it's wrong to lacerate a child for trying to cross a river for safety, like that's important. It's important that human beings are able to like be around and talk to each other. And if it means that you don't go to the front lines and burn yourself out or, then that's what it means.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. It is
Mm-hmm.
okay because if we look at history just in a big, you know, epic kind of like, or it was a longue durée, like we've been pretty comfortable for a long time. We've
Mm-hmm.
been,
Mm-hmm.
like up until COVID, maybe as a
Mm-hmm.
society, I would say. Not the most comfortable, but pretty comfortable and pretty. We don't mobilize nationally to fight wars.
Mm-mm.
So I have no idea. I was thinking about it. My parents are in their 70s. I have no idea what it's like to get drafted or to be worried
Right.
about getting drafted.
Mm-hmm.
We can bomb anywhere in the world essentially as a nation state, and it's not going
with
to
a
affect my
drone.
day-to-day life, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many countries
Mm-hmm.
did we bomb like last month, right? Or you know, like, or but it doesn't affect the day-to-day, you know, like operation. Um, and similarly with the ways that we enforce this, you know, this border regime, which eventually, you know, when you say this is coming home to roost, like immigration detention centers and bordering, like, good luck getting out. Good luck getting out if you're not rich and favored by the state after all of this is created.
Oh yeah, I I half jokingly tell people that that wall is made for us because everybody else who's really seriously in need can figure out a way around it. But those of us who've been living comfortable in America for a long time, I include myself, fat Americans aren't going to get their butts up over that fence. I
No,
mean, you know, women's rights are better off in Mexico right now. You have more rights as a woman in Mexico than you do in the United States. So, you know, and it kills me to watch people like before the election, Trumpers were like, if Kamala, or as they say, Kamala, it gets elected, then I'm going to leave the country. And I'm like, oh, for God's sake. So you're saying you need asylum somewhere? But it's okay for them because they think they have enough money to live in some other country and all you need is money. It just seems to always like rights now seem to be equal with money. You have more rights if you have more money. And I guess it's always been that way, let's be honest. But I think just like really starting to see how the administrative state in the United States is just as violent and state violence is just as prevalent here. We're just now seeing more of it. And I think that's a lot of the reason why they're pointing to the migrants, even though the number of migrants, and I do this comparison between, you know, when I was an agent versus now, and how it's actually never been in a national emergency. It doesn't even get near the numbers to agent staffing comparison that we had back in the day. And this has all just been used for politics. And I don't think Americans know what's real and what's not down here on the border, quite honestly. And they
no.
just repeat what they hear. And I think the worst part about it, Andrew, for me was watching the mainstream media who was always accused of being left and like they were open to a lot of the things I was pointing out for a while, and then all of a sudden they pulled back when Biden got in there because they didn't want to hear anything negative about Biden's border stuff. And now of course they're pulling back because you know they're all worried that they're going to go to jail and stuff, and they have every right to be worried. But I mean, there's just no voice to the other side, and they're not even telling the American public like this is state violence what they're doing. This is what we would look at it as another country when you have ICE officials knowingly sending women against their will or against their knowledge to get hysterectomies and to make them infertile. Hello, everybody, stop. You know, there's a serious problem here. And that is violence. And we need to all be shocked by this, but everybody's just like, well, yeah. And I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because I think I'm on the right side of this and because doing the other side nearly killed me and I know I'm right, but I mean I think those days of thinking that we don't have state violence is pretty much gone for me. I feel very radicalized by all this, quite honestly.
Yeah, I mean, this is the big unknown, I think, about how the next bit of this is going to play out. I think for me personally, probably for you, for many other people, the experience of the first Trump, you know, that the first Trump regime, like 2017 to 2021, was this like mask off, uh, cognitive dissonance followed by kind of shock, kind of like lots of just, wow, I've really been living a lie, you know, in the ways that I understood politics, in the ways that I understood. And, you know, I can just, the thing when I'm trying to talk about this with people is like, you just remember the night that the New York Times meter just was like there. And you're just like, your
Mm-hmm.
heart, you know, in 2016, you're just like, what's going on? This can't be
Mm-hmm.
real, you know, but it was real. And, you know, I personally spent a lot of time thinking it wasn't real because of Russia, right? Well, there's no Russia in
Mm-hmm.
this. It's real. People like uh they liked not voting for Kamala Harris. I don't know that they
Yeah.
loved voting for Donald Trump, but um and I think that what is an open question for me is how many more people are gonna discover that the liberal order, you know, the rules-based international order, and also our educations, our the moral teachings that we've absorbed, the educational like direction about, you know, human life is valuable, and, you know, the state is meant to protect it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the case. And so, or
No.
it's at least not consistent with our lived experiences, many of us, not all of us. And so, like, how many more people are gonna you know, kind of like awaken to this reality? But one of the things that I think we have to be, what I have to be really humble about is like, I was so wrong for so long and so confident about the way I was that, you know, like, it's not going to be me telling somebody they're wrong that's going to get them to realize it. You know, it's
Yeah.
I had to see for myself and like feel for myself. And, you know, I think the thing that we share with a lot of people who voted against Joe Biden or didn't vote at all is a feeling that the government isn't working on our behalf and that we have no functional ability to control it, and that there's a set of people whose interests it works in favor of and that's who gets to control it, and it is very often screwing the little guy, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
I, that is the appeal of a populist message that, you know, says, yeah, you're being screwed, and then gives you an enemy to say, oh, that's who's screwing you. You know.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
so uh, the Democrats chose not to do any of that sort of economic and, you know, acknowledging the illegitimacy of a lot of our institutions. They just chose not to do it after, you know, after he said we're going to return to normal, nothing is going to fundamentally change. Like, I just think about these things and it's just like, in hindsight it's so obvious, and it was
Right.
obvious to me
Right.
at the time. I was telling people in his government, like, if you persist in this messaging, if you persist in these coalitions that you're attempting to build, that cannot you cannot you cannot, as a Democratic Party, you can't be tough enough for the people who are saying you're weak on the border. There are no
Yeah.
facts that you can
Yeah.
present that undoes the
Yeah.
billboard on the top of Lookout Mountain, not Lookout Mountain,
Mm-hmm.
but Mont Eagle, that says, you know, Biden fixed the damn border. Like, there's not going to
Mm-hmm.
be a day where the guy who owns the truck stop or owns the sign realizes, oh wait, you know, this is like, so I don't know. I think we have to think through, like, why are people so um, susceptible to this sort of divergence from what we've been taught, you know? Um,
Well, I
and
think a lot of people are susceptible to it now because a lot of people are suffering, wouldn't you say?
yeah, yeah, I would. And I think, you know, for all of what we heard about how great the economy was, I noticed like homelessness was up 18 or 20%. It's like the largest
Mm-hmm.
increase since the Depression, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
the increase
And
in,
they haven't solved anything, Andrew. I mean, you look at the opioid crisis, you look at fentanyl coming in. They don't want to stop all of that. And school loans and food costs going up and this and that. And I think, a lot of people are still surviving, but you're not surviving as well as you could be before. You're already on the edge as it is. And then you just see people running around with billions and it's a strange, strange, strange fucking world. It's a strange fucking world that we're in right now.
yeah, I mean, whether it's realizing that the Texas Lone Star folks were shooting at migrants in the very same way they did in November of 2018, but 7 years after that happened, there was, or I guess 6 years after it happened. So in Tijuana, Maria and her kids were shot at on camera with tear gas, and it created this international uproar. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, that happened last month in
Mm-hmm.
Texas. They
Mm-hmm.
openly said, "Oh yeah, we laid down some smoke to deter migrants from crossing." And the head and like the caption of the film, the picture, it says, Texas deters migrants. Like didn't say they
Mm-hmm.
shot at
Mm-hmm.
them with
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
chemical weapons, right? Like it said,
Yeah.
no, they're deterring them. I think you mentioned Luigi and the sort of like awakening that many people who didn't realize it are coming to their knowledge that people in the United States have a really hard time getting healthcare. It's like really expensive and uncertain. You see a guy like Ben Shapiro getting ratioed when he's saying this is, anyway. So like, I think that the basics, education, health, water, housing, energy, like a little bit of, being able to work one job and pay your bills and have a little left over to take your family on vacation once, like that stuff is like, it's like frogs in a pot of
Mm-hmm.
boiling water. And then you hear people who are living in other states, other countries that, you know, are not going bankrupt because they got sick, and who are not having to bury their parents because they can't afford the experimental drug that,
Right.
the pharmaceutical company is charging, is getting $2 for in Canada, but it's like 2,000 here, whatever, like it is this weird thing. Um, because if you think the contradictions that we live in are going to eventually implode the system, it's just as a
Yeah.
historical process, right? You lose enough
Mm-hmm.
cohesion, you lose enough like institutional um, legitimacy, which is what they're terrified of, is losing legitimacy. You know, um,
I think they've
it's a
already
massive.
lost it. I mean, when you have a judge sitting there saying, "Yeah, you can rape your kids and pay $3,000 and not have to do any of this," the cover up teams and everything that happens. But I think that what we're going to see in the next 4 years, I mean, we don't really know, but I think without a doubt, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this, in as far as state violence, whether it's done through these administrative policies that then lead, push people out to their deaths, or let Border Patrol agents go free after committing sexual crimes against children and stuff like that. I think it's, when I look back to his first administration and see his reaction with Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd protest and everything. I mean, I think we're going to see more of that, but I think we're going to see, we thought it was bad before. I think we're going to see a huge escalation from law enforcement. And I wonder if you think that because of that, because of Luigi, that maybe people would start to go, wait a minute, these cops are all about protecting CEOs and businesses and the people with money and this and that. Do you think that realization that it's not necessarily left versus right, like we could probably come together on a lot of things, it's more top versus bottom. Do you think that's going to continue?
We haven't been in a historical context that I'm aware of. I'd love to be wrong about this, by the way. So, any of your viewers or listeners know that I'm wrong, tell me, tell Jen. Um,
Okay.
but I don't know of a historical context where information can be transmitted so cleanly and efficiently to so many people so quickly. So you can immediately see an image. You don't know if it's real, but you can see it. It could be an AI
Mm-hmm.
generated image. And you can that goes so far. So like the ability to disseminate information has never been so accessible to people. And also, we have a surveillance state that is truly like it, Orwell would envy it. I spent a lot of the first 6 months of 2024 really diving deep into real-time crime centers and the modern police environment. And what I learned, that I think a lot of people are going to learn soon, is that there is functionally nothing that you can do in a populated area that will escape the prying eyes of the surveillance state, or at least the algorithms and the AI that's culling all of the data that they're collecting. And also, if you try and get out of a population center, then you will be even more interesting to the surveillance state. And this is
Mm-hmm.
accelerating as we basically, are complicit in it by putting ring cams on our doors. And my parents have a surveillance camera in their kitchen, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? What do you think is going to happen in the kitchen?
Oh my
It's like,
God.
um I don't say
There's
that.
less crime now than there was when we were growing up. It's just
and
insane how scared everybody is. It's
and
just
they would
insane.
say, and I think everybody who makes some buck off of this stuff would say, and that's because of all of our technology. When tell that to 15 people in New Orleans, who are
Mm-hmm.
surrounded
Mm-hmm.
by cops in a
Mm-hmm.
heavily surveilled area, or tell that to any
Mm-hmm.
anyway. Yeah. So like the capacity of the state to do targeted repression of anyone who would organize in an effective way has grown to a point that I don't think anywhere else on the world, except for potentially some parts of China, can really rival. And some, obviously, all of the the sort of like imperially monitored Middle East. Um, but in the U.S., like this technology is being fueled by capital who uh, get government money
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
know what we're all doing all the time. And it reduces the impact of that instantaneous communication, right? It deals with the fact that we can communicate with each other in these very efficient ways across time, across space. Like we can get videos or we can get audio to each other and collapse the distance between an activist in northern New York and someone in Tucson, right? Through Signal
Mm-hmm.
or through WhatsApp or whatever. Except it also captures it all, and it makes
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
organizing and it makes any form of like coordinated politicization of a population that might be disgruntled makes it very difficult. And to the extent that you name as a goal the undoing of a system, you know, um, there's nothing stopping that system from calling you a terrorist, right? There's no check on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, and you can see in the differentiated treatment we have between the two guys that blew stuff up on on New Year's Day. Like one's a terrorist, one's not a terrorist. And, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so
One gets sympathy, the other does not. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so what I guess what I they both trained in the same
I know.
so which has a ton of child sexual assault. um
Yeah.
some would say that that's because that's the only thing JAG prosecutes, that national security offenses. Some of my JAG lawyer friends know that when everything else gets resolved, it's just the child sex crimes and the kid porn
Right.
that end up taking to court martial, unless you kill somebody or.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that when people go to the border to take a photograph and do a press conference and say, when people are demanded to go to the border, like somebody asked, when's the last time you went to the border, in politics, right? um, the the systems of control are in our phones, they're in our homes, they're on our streets, they're in the all of the transactions, all the 10,000 data point profiles that companies collect and sell to the government. And those systems of control are only going to be accelerated. So, you know, um, what does that mean for our ability to do anything about it if we don't like it? Like that's why I say when you're uh, building this open air prison, you know, um, on Turtle Island, like good luck getting out if you disagree. If you
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
visibly, vocally oppose the people who hold those keys, good luck getting a passport. Good luck legitimately crossing a port of entry into another country. you know, good luck.
I
So like
don't think
it's a,
people understand the extent to which we control other people's borders either.
that's right.
I
No,
mean,
we hold the whole system,
hmm
from the Darien Gap, and then with NATO and our the Fortress Europe and all of this other stuff, and we understand that climate change and other destabilizing factors are going to put people on the move, and we don't want them moving. So
I think the thing that I've been most frightened about with the Luigi thing and then this judge in Tucson that let the agent off for child pedophilia is just watching them justify the reasons and using terrorism and this and that, and then not using it for some people, and just seeing how, like, especially with this agent in Tucson, the pedophile agent, like, this case has been going on for 5 years, the trial and everything for 5 years, and I didn't know about it. And I'm an expert in this, and I knew that they were doing this. I knew that Border Patrol had gone to local law enforcement agencies and asked them down here, at least on the southern border, to not put Border Patrol agent arrest in the paper and to hide them. That's what they've been doing. And they've gone so far now with this guy, which is what I thought they were doing. So, like, I can see the people in the federal courts, I can see them in some of the bigger, like San Diego courts and stuff, but I can't see them in like Cochise Superior. I can't see them in those Pima County Superior. But they went so far as to not just redact the name or use an alias. Now they've gone so far with this guy to hide them and not purposely put them in the database. So now the courts have created some sort of policy over there, at least in Tucson and Pima County specifically, where the judge, the prosecutor, the defense attorneys, everybody in the courtroom, including the court reporter, all know not to talk about this case because it involves a Border Patrol agent. And that's preferential treatment. And I mean, and I think, well, is that violence? Is that state violence? And I think, well, it's going to be state violence because all of that led to this man being allowed to have lifetime probation for his actions of 11 years of this, allowed agents to come in and stand behind him and say that he was a great guy and all this. And the judge quotes all this other stuff. And he's going to go out and commit more violence. And so by them creating this secret cabal in there to keep law enforcement names, out of the database so that people like me can't see it and report it, that makes the community in there not realize that this man is there, and they're releasing this man into this community with no restrictions except for one, to stay away from only one of the victims for life. And it's just watching administratively how it just keeps getting uglier and dirtier and nastier. And I feel like I'm just screaming and waving my hands, and, and nobody's listening. Nobody's listening. So,
well, I mean, you're awash if you live in where
hmm,
we live, the Imperial Core, you're awash in violence, you know,
yeah, yeah, that's true.
and you're a day away from being murdered in a mass shooting in the mall, at a
Mm-hmm.
school, at the Waffle House, like there. And then there's all the sort of like daily sort of petty things that state violence does to you. I mean, I think one of the scholars that I like a lot describes state violence as reducing your life chances, or reducing your chance at living a long life. Like you can measure it in like the reduced life expectancy. It's no
Mm-hmm.
accident.
Mm-hmm.
U.S. life expectancy is going down. It's one of the worst in the quote unquote developed world for many metrics, and it gets even worse if you're not a white person, right? Particularly a white guy. And so like the the reality of its pervasiveness demands of us, if we're thinking about it, like just grappling with what's in front of us. I consider it to be state violence that I have to look at a very heavily armed agent of the state with the power to kill me if they want to, basically unreviewable, right? I don't get any due
Right.
process. They want to shoot me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sitting there on their phone watching a video while there's a person who, for the cost of a couple of the pieces of equipment that they're wearing, could be housed and would not be actively, disturbing, it would not be disturbed, number one, because
Mm-hmm.
they'd have
Mm-hmm.
care and shelter and food and medicine, um, theoretically. And, it's like, what are you there for? Like all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
then people do get killed on the train, or they get killed, doing things. And so the answer that the state has for us when that happens is, well, we know just the thing. It's more more violence, right? Like,
Right.
uh,
Right.
and I think one of the reasons I think we like each other's stuff is I've been thinking along the same lines in terms of transparency and secrecy when it comes to judicial proceedings and the court systems that are supposed to, like, by by being public, they're supposed to return legitimacy to a system that, if the thing just happens, then you could say, well, this is not a good system. Children
Mm-hmm.
getting molested by their father, and there's no consequences because he happens to work as an agent of the state, like
Mm-hmm.
that would be a bad system if you were to try and codify it and put it up for a vote. Most people would not say that if you go and are part of a tactical unit. You should explain what BORTAC is, by the way, because God knows what else that guy did. Be interested to see his personnel file, but
It's
like,
an elite SWAT team that shouldn't exist in the Border Patrol.
yeah, with very limited
No oversight whatsoever into those guys. And I guarantee you, if you steroid tested them, 90% of them would fail and lose their jobs. But, whatever.
yeah, I had a life and death encounter with a BORTAC team, at a port of entry once, and
Ooh.
you know, we
They think they're a SEAL team, is
yeah, they
what they
do. And
think.
there was one person who, surrounded by special operators, you could tell he, like, had his wits about him. And I
Mm
said in no uncertain terms, is like, under no circumstances are you deploying munitions at these children. And so, just so we
hmm.
understand
Mm
the terms of
hmm. Mm
engagement
hmm.
are here, there's no way you're doing that.
Yeah.
You guys could put all that shit away,
Mm
and
hmm.
because we're not going to force you to do it, but, like, he was the only one who was willing to make eye contact and acknowledge that they were not going to gas a bunch of children at the border,
Mm hmm.
uh, and that, so that was my personal, like, encounter with these guys. But it's not surprising that, so no, people would not accept a system they would not see as just if you would just put it to them to say, you get to molest two of your children if you work for the Border Patrol, if you're a special agent. Like, people wouldn't do that. And so the reason you have trials, the reason you have courts, the reason you have punishment and stuff like that, theoretically, is to say, we know right from wrong and we enforce it when bad stuff happens, as a matter of, like, returning an equilibrium to the system. And then when you do it in secret and you enforce the unjust outcome that you've described. By the way, I don't think jail is justice for that guy. I think he needs a lot of help. And if he doesn't get the
Mm
help,
hmm.
he's going to hurt somebody else.
Mm hmm.
Like, I,
Mm hmm.
but that's not the system that Cochise County, like, that's not the system. So I've been thinking a lot about secrecy and about how much we're doing things without anybody knowing about it. We being the government, not me, but and FOIA and how broken it is. And if you were to sit back and say, is this what the law guarantees us? You would have to say no. And then, is anybody saying, oh, your rights are being violated, we want to remedy it? Also no. And so this is just what it is. We live in a
Right.
secret
Absolutely. Yeah.
security state that does not abide by the guarantees that are structurally in place to prevent tyranny and to preserve
Mm hmm.
democracy, nominal democracy. That's what, like, I didn't make all that stuff up. That's what the people who passed FOIA and the state public records laws, that's what they say. They say a well-informed citizenry is necessary, vital to the functioning
Right.
of a democracy, right? You
Right.
can't you can't hold the governors accountable to the governed if you don't have information.
Mm
And
hmm.
so I think it was, Madison maybe, who said popular government without popular information is a prelude to a farce or a tragedy or both or something. And we don't have it. Like, we don't have the ability to find out how many people, died preventable deaths in custody without literally suing and waiting years to do it. And that's not like a free society. So we just have to like, again, this is like my educational process of refusing to say no, 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 it's not that way. This is the system being broken. And it's up to us
Hmm.
as people who care and believe, in the things we've been taught to make sure that the system works. System doesn't work. It's not supposed to work. This isn't working, right? The purpose of the system is what it does. If the purpose of FOIA were to give us our records and we'd be getting our fucking records, we're not getting them because that's not the purpose. The purpose is to make it look transparent. Well, it's actually secret, which is why, like if you were to try and go and get that guy's file, pretty important. Like,
No, they put it under seal. And I'm like, why did they put it under seal? You know what he said? Well, he didn't go so far as to say law enforcement sensitive. I was like, because at first they were kind of saying, oh, we should put it under seal because of this, because Border Patrol agents, BORTAC Border Patrol agents, high ranking agents apparently came to testify in this man's behalf that he was a good guy. And I mean, the judge even goes, you present a dichotomy to the court, is what he said. Because he comes across as such a hero and all this. And the judge even said, I wasn't there. I don't know if it's true.
he
I don't
pled
know if
guilty.
it happened. I know. He said,
He
I'm only
pled
pleading
guilty because
guilty
they had enough to
because
convict
there was
him.
a first trial and a hung jury. And he said, I'm only going to plead guilty to two of the charges of the 14 charges because I'm doing this for my family. And then the judge said, and I think it's very honorable that you're doing this for your family or something to that effect. But I mean, it just is like, we're going to have to talk because I have been sitting in courtrooms along the southern border with certain cases, different types of cases, and watching how California does it. I've seen how El Centro does it. I've seen how Texas does it. And now it's different in every area, but I know how they generally are getting away with this. And we can talk about it privately afterwards if you would
Yeah, of
like.
course.
But thank you for being with me and introducing this subject and talking about it because, like, I don't hear anybody, at least, on mainstream. I know that there's experts and people who write about this and everything, but I think we should talk about it more as this is state violence and
Yeah,
call it out for what it is. So,
yeah,
all right, cool. Till next
cool.
time.
Thanks, Jen.